Hey guys, with this video we begin the series on Iamblichus' Exhortation to Philosophy text. I filmed about 85 videos on this, and there is 50 more videos to be done, roughly. About each chapter of the text, I've taken small parts of each chapter and described them in these videos. So the material is much easier to absorb, and you can keep rewatching each video and memorizing the material much better. But the point of all these videos and the whole series is to motivate you to study the actual text directly. So the aim of these videos is to kind of ignite the fire and generate a familiarity between you and the text, so you can go into the real text and study it directly, because it is incredible how the text is written. And I'll explain a bit about this towards the end of this video. Okay, so first of all, the way I designed this series is I write the chapter of the text here, and then the essence of the chapter here. So the first chapter, Iamblichus says that we will now, in this text, study the Pythagorean system. And he outlines the sections in which he will do it. His approach to doing this, to showing you the Pythagorean system. What I have done here is also created a brief overview of each chapter for you. This is not in the first chapter of the book. This is just my brief overview. So let us, as usual in this series, I begin by explaining as closely as possible and describing, even using the words that Iamblichus used to describe each part of what he is talking about. And then I give my interpretations on it, just to help my mind kind of process what he has said. So in terms of the first chapter, what Iamblichus is saying, at the very beginning, he is saying, we will now study essentially a science that leads to all virtue. And the science he is referring to is philosophy. And he says this science will give you the acquisition of all sciences. So it is the most important of sciences. This is how he begins the chapter. Then he says, the way we will do this in this text is by starting with general philosophy and philosophical ideas. So the first several chapters are about the general philosophy. Then he says we will talk about medial philosophy, and by this he means combining general with the Pythagorean, specifically Pythagorean philosophy. So he will talk about medial philosophy in this next few chapters. Then he said we will talk about the Pythagorean technical demonstrations in some chapters. And we will finish with Pythagorean exhortations. And he finishes with Pythagorean symbols. So very specific symbols and common phrases that you find, even now, you find as normal, even in different cultures. But they have roots in Pythagorean tradition. It's quite fascinating. And the symbols are kind of like, the symbols that are referred to here are phrases that every normal, ordinary people use without really understanding what the phrases mean. But they are very powerful phrases, and he deciphers those phrases. This is a very sort of unique opportunity to look at these things. So that's all he does in the first chapter, pretty much. Well, the part that I'm describing. He does a little bit more in it. Now, in terms of the chapters, he doesn't outline which section falls into which chapter. He just goes in, and I think he expects us to kind of understand it. But it's not that easy to understand exactly which chapter is general philosophy, which is medial, because he's constantly talking about Pythagoras, and and what exactly he means by technical demonstration. So it's not that clear, but it's okay. So let's have a quick view on what each chapter brings us, and this is fascinating. He basically, what he does in this text, this is my interpretation now and my sort of take on it. What he does in this text is his goal is to motivate us to study philosophy, and not just study it theoretically, but to live a philosophical life. So you will see this throughout the text constantly. He's talking about theoretical philosophy and practical philosophy. Theoretical philosophy, as I understand from this text, he means studying, actual studying of texts related to philosophy. And practical philosophy, what I understand he means, is things like self-control and then worship, developing piety. So he talks a lot about self-control and how that is an essential part of the life of a philosopher in this text. And then he talks about importance of piety towards the end of the text. And I assume also there falls into that category falls worship, meditation, rituals, and so forth. So his goal, as I understand it, is to ignite a fire within us to study and live a philosophical life. And he does this by doing this from all kinds of angles. As you will see in these chapters, it is really quite fascinating what he does. And it's very, very unique. I haven't seen it done like this pretty much anywhere. Except maybe in Plato's discussions. Because essentially a lot of these chapters, they tap into Plato's ideas. And if you get a translation where Plato is referenced in this text, then you will see that each chapter taps and explains kind of like certain Plato's concepts from different books. It's very interesting. Okay, so let's begin. So first chapter I've just outlined what it said. It says the general sections, and that this whole text is basically the study of a Pythagorean system. And we remember that a lot of Pythagorean knowledge was lost. So this is an extremely valuable text. Then he goes into a second chapter. He talks about aphorisms and how those ignite virtue. So very general aphorisms about life. Then he goes into talking about the golden verses of Pythagoras and deciphers a couple of them. Not a couple, but there's quite a few that he deciphers. In the fourth chapter, he talks about scientific proofs of why naturally we seek philosophy. The way we're built, we seek philosophy. And he does this by, I think in this chapter, by explaining and describing how our senses work and how our eyesight works. That eyesight is constantly seeking knowledge, that its purpose is to acquire knowledge. It's quite fascinating. So the purpose of eyesight is to try and acquire gnosis, kind of enlightenment, knowledge, true knowledge. But because eyesight is a physical sense, it cannot quite do that. But we have a non-physical sense to acquire true knowledge. And that is reason and contemplations and so forth. So he links all of that together, and you will see in my videos, I lay it out step by step, explained it much better than I just have now. Okay, so the fifth chapter is about the Pythagorean divisions. So this is there are several divisions of how goods and happiness is split in the Pythagorean system, as I understand it, and he presents those and explains why those divisions prove that we should study philosophy and live a philosophical life. This is also a very interesting chapter. Next chapter, sixth chapter, is on practical life. And how philosophy is useful to us in the practical life. There is also another chapter very much on practical life, and it's chapter 10, and it's about arts and crafts that we have in our professions, vocations that we have in the normal human life. And Iamblichus proves that leading a philosophical life will make us much more efficient and much more effective in our everyday professions and vocations, than leading a non-philosophical life. And he proves it. So this is a fascinating part. He unites philosophy with everyday practicality and shows that leading a philosophical life makes us much more efficient and effective in everyday life. And it is very easy to see how that is the case, because leading a philosophical life, essentially our goal is developing wisdom. We become wiser and wiser and wiser. So naturally, if we are wiser, anything we do will be more effective, because that wisdom will overflow into it. This is an argument you will see in this text over and over. I'll be repeating in these videos. Okay, so 7th chapter, he says that wisdom is desired per se by us, and because of that, it proves it that it's a kind of like an essential intrinsic core good that we seek, unlike anything else. And this is also a very interesting chapter. Chapter 7, he proves to us that wisdom is very important by common notions. So we'll quickly go through this. I don't want this video to be too long. In the chapter 9, he talks about the design of nature and how that is proving to us that we're designed in such a way as to seek wisdom, that we're essentially designed to live a philosophical life. This is how nature designed us. And if we do not live a philosophical life, then we're not fulfilling our purpose in nature. This is also an argument that you will constantly see in this text. Chapter 10, as I said, he proves to us that a philosophical life is most useful to us in terms of arts, crafts, vocations, and other humanly activities. Chapter 11 is very interesting. He shows to us that leading a philosophical life will be most pleasurable life for us, most pleasant. Unlike people might think, this goes against what people typically think. Because in the life of philosophy, we have to cut off a lot of physical pleasures. And so an outsider will look at us and think, oh my God, this person, they must be very miserable. They're cutting out all these pleasures. But we do this for the purpose of enabling our mind to go higher and higher in contemplations. And that gives us much more intense and powerful pleasures than anything physical world can give. So this is also an argument you will constantly see in this text. And I made several videos on it when we get to that argument in the relevant chapter. Okay, chapter 12, again he talks about happiness, how a philosophical life will bring you most happiness. Chapter 13, he talks about philosophical concepts, general philosophical concepts, and how those can be used to incite desire for happiness. And let me see if this is the one about the torture. No. Okay, never mind. Chapter 14, he talks about the lives of philosophers. If we can look at their lives and see what we can gain from their lives to motivate ourselves to a life of philosophy. Lives of top philosophers. In the chapter 15, he gives the famous Plato's cave allegory, and the way he presents it is the nature of knowledge, he says. So how knowledge works in terms of how we're conditioned to it. And in chapter 16, he takes it further. He talks about the nature of education. So chapter 15 and 16 kind of go together. They follow naturally from one from another. So in the chapter 16, he proves to us that a person who leads a philosopher's life essentially can be conditioned from childhood to do that. Or the reverse can happen. A childhood can, I think this is the chapter where he proves that his point by talking about childhood. Let me quickly check. Chapter 16. That is right, yes. So he says an evil man can be turned into an incredible philosopher simply if his childhood is created in a specific way, where he's restrained from satisfying and getting lost in corporeal pleasures. And if in his childhood his mind is turned towards philosophy. And this is a very powerful idea. And in psychology, we also see this, that childhood hugely conditions and upbringing, conditions how the person behaves later on in life, what kind of life they lead, and so forth. And here Iamblichus is essentially saying that an evil person is essentially a badly conditioned philosopher. Because by nature we're designed to pursue philosophy, as you will see constantly in these arguments. And if a person has turned evil, it is likely that their childhood and not just childhood, but the younger years, that they were conditioned in such a way that the person has turned evil. And he explains what those conditionings are. So this is a very interesting chapter. In chapter 17, he talks about different myths and how those myths can inspire us towards the study of philosophy. In chapter 18, he talks about goods and evils. If we look at a physical body and then what that tells us about the goods and evils for the soul, that is a very powerful chapter. In chapter 19, he talks about, also continues about goods and happiness. In chapter 20, he gives us general counsels and advice on how to lead a life. And chapter 21 finishes with very, very specific Pythagorean symbols and common phrases that have become common now, but people don't realize it, that were created during Pythagorean, in the Pythagorean schools, as I understand it, to symbolize very powerful ideas and behaviors and actions for a person who wants to lead a philosopher's life. This is very powerful stuff. So that's it. So this video is longer than normally I want to make these videos, because we went through all these chapters. Now a very quick interpretation. This text is incredibly powerful as I understand it, because it lays a foundation upon which everything else will be built. And the more powerfully you absorb these ideas that he presents, the more you absorb them, the more powerful the text becomes for you. Because this essentially sets the reason for why you would want to, it doesn't matter, meditate, live a spiritual life, worship, or just live a good human life, a life of virtue, and try to overcome your vices and negative habits. Whatever your path is, essentially, this text will give power and purpose for you to pursue your path. And the way it does it, there's no religion, there's none of that in this text. This is just pure observations and logical arguments. So this text can be applied to any religion, any culture, pretty much anything, because it's just pure observations. Yeah, so I think it is very important to study this text and to absorb it as much as possible. And when you notice that you have moments on your path that you fall away from spiritual practice or from leading a pure life, then this text can be very helpful to again ignite the fire for you. Because when you read it, it all makes sense. Happiness, wisdom, self-control, purity, it all sort of, the way Iamblichus presents it, it all fits together very beautifully and supports each other, and very logically, like a Swiss clock. And you will see it as he presents the arguments. So I've been using this text, I've been reading it over and over and over and over again, and each time I feel like a fire starts within me or is ignited more towards pursuing a life of philosophy. So I really recommend you this text. So ideally, of course, you want to buy it and study it, the actual text, because these videos are like just a very hint towards what is being said in each chapter. So that's it, guys. The next 84 videos. I filmed this video at the end, so this is like 86th video. But yet this video is the beginning. So the next few videos, the quality will drop, and then it will gradually pick up to a better quality. And towards the end, towards the last 40 videos or so, we're gonna be having like a mini altar here with the fire. But throughout all the videos, I had a fire in the background going, like right next to me on my table, on my altar on the table, to keep with Pythagorean tradition also, which is when these things are discussed, we have a fire burning. Because again, that is a symbol, a powerful symbol, and it represents a lot of things and helps the mind go higher during discussions on these topics. So that's it. Let's finish with just a quick 2-minute meditation. You can do any meditation you want. I'll do the one I usually do, and then we finish this video. Okay, thank you guys. YouTube might show a video now and you can click on it to keep watching.